You know, we hear these words thrown around all the time, right? The cloud, frictionless money. It all sounds so abstract, so weightless. But what if I told you that was all kind of a lie? That the entire global financial system is literally anchored to the bottom of the ocean by something surprisingly fragile? Yeah, let's get into it. So let me just ask you this straight up. Where does all that digital money, we're talking trillions of dollars flying around the globe every single day, where does it actually exist? You probably think it's floating around in some decentralized digital ether, but it's not. The whole concept of the cloud is probably one of the most brilliant marketing tricks ever pulled. The truth is way more physical, way more tangible, and it lives right here on the dark, cold, and honestly, pretty sketchy floor of the world's oceans. This right here is the real, physical foundation of our global economy. We are talking about a massive network of 1.7 million kilometers of fiber optic cables. These are the actual physical highways that carry more than 99% of all international data. And I mean everything. Every bank transfer, every stock trade, every single financial transaction. And the wildest part? For all their importance, a lot of these cables are no thicker than a garden hose. And here's what one of them looks like up close. Right at the very center, you've got these hair-thin strands of super pure glass. And that's what's carrying our data as little pulses of light. That glass is wrapped in copper for power, then galvanized steel wires for strength, and then a thick outer armor to protect it from stuff like, ship anchors and fishing nets. This is not abstract tech. This is some serious, heavy-duty marine engineering. Now, here's the thing. This global network isn't some perfectly spaced-out, resilient web. Nope. Geography forces it into these incredibly narrow bottlenecks. And these are the choke points where a single failure can cause a global meltdown. And the most critical choke point on the entire planet is right here, the Egyptian corridor. This tiny strip of land and sea connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, well, it's basically the main data bridge between Europe, Asia, and Africa. So how much risk are we really talking about? Get this, a staggering 17% of all global internet traffic gets squeezed through this one little area. That's almost a fifth of the world's data connectivity, all hanging by a thread in this one single narrow corridor. Okay, let's look at another, maybe even more extreme example. We all know India is a digital powerhouse, right? Processing thousands of payments every single second. But its connection to the rest of the world is shockingly fragile. And this stat is just unbelievable. 95% of India's entire international bandwidth all comes ashore on one single 6-kilometer stretch of beach in Mumbai. People have called it a Hormuz trap for data. Just imagine any disruption there, a storm, an accident, deliberate sabotage. You could trigger an immediate liquidity crisis for one of the world's biggest economies. It's nuts. Okay, so now let's zoom in on the most extreme users of this whole system, high-frequency traders. For these guys, finance isn't a game of minutes or even seconds. It is a constant, relentless race against the actual physical speed of light. See, in a standard fiber optic cable, light actually has to travel through solid glass, which slows it down by about 30% compared to how fast it moves in a vacuum. Now, to you and me, that delay is nothing. But in high-frequency trading, it's completely unacceptable. So they're pushing for crazy new tech, like hollow core fiber, where light zips through air-filled tubes at almost its maximum possible speed. This is literally an arms race measured in nanoseconds. And here's why that obsession with speed is so important. If a main cable gets cut, all that data has to be rerouted, usually along a longer path. That tiny, tiny delay, we're talking mere milliseconds, can be a catastrophe for a trading algorithm. It's not just a slowdown, it's a total system failure. This is exactly the kind of thing that can trigger those terrifying flash crashes that destabilize markets, all because one cable snapped on the bottom of the ocean. So what's the actual price tag on this vulnerability? What does it really cost in dollars and cents when one of these links gets severed? Well, the economic damage is massive, it's immediate, and it can last for a very, very long time. According to people who track this stuff, a major cable break costs the global financial industry over $1.5 million per hour. That's from lost trades, lost revenue, and everyone scrambling to buy up emergency bandwidth at insane prices. Now let's think about a whole country. A recent study figured out that a total digital blackout in a place like Taiwan, a global hub for computer chips, would cost its economy $55 million a day. It's not just about finance at that point. It's the entire global tech supply chain grinding to a halt. And the damage just gets worse over time. Countries that get hit with a cable break see their GDP growth drop by about 2% right away. But if those disruptions keep happening, the long-term hit is just staggering. Their economies can end up lagging behind their neighbors by as much as 9%. It becomes this huge drag on their ability to grow. For the longest time, the biggest threat to these cables was just accidents. A ship dropping anchor in the wrong spot, or a fishing trawler dragging its nets. But that's all changing. We are now in a new era of deliberate, often invisible threats to this critical piece of our world. And the new threats are really sophisticated. You've got gray zone sabotage, where someone uses a regular-looking civilian ship to cut a cable so it's really hard to prove who did it. There's infrastructure lawfare, which is just weaponizing bureaucracy to block repairs for months on end. And then, of course, you still have natural threats like earthquakes, plus this growing risk of having the whole system controlled by just a handful of companies. And that brings us to who actually owns these digital lifelines. It isn't governments anymore. Today, just 4 tech giants, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Amazon, control over 70% of all the undersea bandwidth in the world. They're building this for their own cloud businesses, which means they're concentrating control of what is, for all intents and purposes, a public utility into just a few private hands. So with all these dangers, you would think we'd have a massive fleet of repair ships on standby, right? Well, the reality is kind of shocking. It all comes down to this one number, 19. That's it. There are only 19 ships on the entire planet dedicated to maintaining this whole subsea network. Think about that. In a major crisis, that tiny fleet would be completely overwhelmed almost instantly. But hang on, what about satellites? Can't Starlink just save the day? The short answer is no, and the reason is simple: bandwidth. All the satellite constellations combined handle less than 3% of global traffic. A single modern fiber cable has way more capacity than an entire satellite network. Satellites are a fantastic last-ditch backup for sure, but they are absolutely not a replacement for this underwater backbone. So is this whole situation just hopeless? Well, not entirely. There are things we can do to build some resilience. Nations are looking at building new overland dry routes to get around those choke points. Some are even developing their own repair ships so they aren't so dependent on others. They're even figuring out how to use the cables themselves as sensors to give early warnings for earthquakes. But all of this takes money, and more importantly, it takes urgent political will. Which really just leaves us with this one final thought. We have built this incredibly complex, high-speed global economy on a foundation of glass fibers that we laid across one of the most hostile and inaccessible environments on Earth. So the question isn't really if this fragile foundation is going to be tested. The question is when. And how long can it really hold up before it finally shatters?